For me, Palestine is a very important country because Palestinians not only happen to be Muslim, but also the third holiest, most sacred site of Islam is in Palestine. And they have been under occupation for 100 years. So obviously, Palestine is close to my heart. But Israel equally, I believe they should have all the freedom to live peacefully. There is no such thing as, oh, we believe Israel should be wiped off the face of the earth. I mean, no, nothing like that. Israel should exist, but Palestine should also equally exist. And Palestine should exist according to the UN resolutions, which Israel is violating. And once both parties, the Palestinians have already done so, acknowledged what the UN is saying. Once Israel starts following and abiding by the UN resolutions, I think that's the way forward to have peace. Otherwise, we may have ceasefire, please God, quickly, but the conflict hasn't ended.
Umar, it is so lovely to have you in the podcast studio today. I'm delighted that you could make it. You're a busy man.
You're very welcome, and thank you very much, Coromila Mahagat, for inviting me.
I love the little bit of Irish in there. Can you just explain to our listeners who you are, where you came from, and what you do in Ireland currently, please?
Okay. I'm Shaykh Dr Umar Al-Qadri. I am the Chairperson of the Irish Muslim Peace and Integration Council and the Chief Imam of the Islamic Centre of Ireland. I was born and I grew up in the Netherlands. I moved to Pakistan to study theology, and I also went to Egypt for some time. In 2004, I moved to Ireland to pursue my studies, but also for family reunification purposes. And so I settled and moved to Dublin, Ireland. And since 2004, I've been here in the state. So Ireland is home. And I spend my time as a chairperson of the Irish Muslim Council, as an advisor to the EU on religious affairs, on particularly Islamophobia, protection of places of worship, and other projects I'm involved with. I have 3 children. So yeah, that's basically a little bit about myself.
What is an imam?
Okay. An imam is a guide and is the Muslim leader, faith leader. And anybody can be an imam who has studied, of course, completed his seminary studies, and also whoever leads the prayer also is called an imam. So an imam would not always be someone who is qualified in faith, in religion, in Islam. Sometimes it could be anyone that just leads the prayer, but I'm an imam in the context of somebody who is actually a qualified theologian, who is an Islamic scholar, who studied Islamic sciences.
When you went to Pakistan, did you have family there?
I did have family there, but I didn't move to family. I actually lived in hostels. I lived in the university and the seminary accommodation. My family, I used to meet them once in a while. They were my grandparents when they were alive, my mother and my father and my siblings. Everyone was in the Netherlands. Most of my uncles, my cousins were abroad as well.
Okay.
So I had some family members, but they were quite old of age. But this time I spent with them was, of course, very lovely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you came to Ireland in 2004, how did you find... What was it like for a Muslim man in Ireland at that time?
Well, Ireland was, of course, very different in the sense that I still remember in the shopping centre, I would often be addressed by someone as doctor. I'd be surprised. But I obviously realized the reason is because most of the people that have the same skin colour as me in Dublin 15 happen to be Pakistani Muslim doctors. So this is why a lot of people assumed I was a doctor as well.
That is so interesting because we had, when I was growing up, we had Muslim students live with us and they were all studying in the RCSI to become medical doctors. We had 2 that I remember distinctly, one of whom I remember very well. He was from Kuwait and he stayed with us for his entire medical school training. It was, so that's that. And I suppose people would associate people with your skin colour and the way you look.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think also the Irish Muslim community is quite unique compared to the other European Muslim communities. And this is because the first of the early Muslims that came in Ireland and settled here were medical professionals, were either students of the RCSI or they were those that had completed the studies and they were practicing medicine in the hospitals here. So the first Muslims happened to be from the medical background, from different countries, but mostly South Asia. So as I said, life was different in the sense that the landscape of Ireland was different. I mean, I moved from the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is a very, very diverse country. Even 20 years ago, the Muslim community was huge. There were mosques, Islamic centres everywhere around. But when I came to Dublin, there was only 2 mosques or 3 mosques at that time. And Dublin 15, where I settled, where I lived and worked at that time, didn't have any mosque at all. So often the Muslims had to travel all the way to the south, to the Clonsky Mosque, or travel to the city centre, South Circular Road Mosque, for the Friday prayers, etc. And this is when we decided in Dublin 15 that we'll have to have our own Islamic centre, so it will be easier for people to have a community centre close to the proximity of their houses.
Okay. Yeah. And did you experience any Islamophobia then, and what's it like now? Because, you know, there is this view of Muslim people being one extreme or the other, isn't there?
Well, to be honest, I did not have the experience of Islamophobia to the extent that we know that is prevalent in other European countries. And that is because Ireland was very different, has always been very different. The Irish people have been very welcoming. People understand the importance of diversity also. And I think that the fact that many Irish people can trace back members in their family that had moved abroad for a better life, better living, they could really, understand why people from other countries moved to Ireland. This is why there wasn't really any form of discrimination or racism. I've had few incidents of young people calling me terrorist or Osama bin Laden, but I mean, these are isolated incidents. But generally speaking, it was a very welcoming country, truly a country of Céad Míle Fáilte. But having said that, the last 2 or 3 years, we can see changes in the attitudes, in the behavior of people. We can see, for example, rhetoric, anti-migrant rhetoric, anti-Muslim rhetoric that is prevalent online, not physically yet, but of course the danger is, and the concern and the worry is that this may transform into actual incidents, physically come out of the virtual world. And that's the main concern that a lot of people have of the Muslim faith. But I think that's not just the Muslim faith, but also other minority communities are facing that backlash. The backlash that we have in the form of protests against migrants, protests against refugees, will obviously affect Muslim minority community or any other minority community as well. But the anger that people have, the emotions that people have, are really emotions and anger that are towards the government because they're upset, which is, rightful, and people should be upset because of the housing crisis, because of the health crisis, because how the past 10 to 15 years, the situation of people's living standard hasn't improved. In fact, it has become much more difficult for people to own, for example, a house, to rent a house, let alone buying a house. It's so difficult compared to other European countries, despite that we have a surplus of 16 billion, euros. So people are angry, rightfully so. People are upset. And in the meantime, we have had about 100,000 or so refugees from mainly Ukraine, other countries, coming to Ireland in the past 2 years. And I think people are upset and angry and it seems that they aren't really being listened to. And that anger, that emotion, unfortunately, is being exploited by but you could call them the far right, you could call them whatever you like. Mm-hmm. But there are certain groups and individuals that would like to spread this narrative, political rhetoric of hatred, of division, of us versus them. And it seems that they are slowly but surely getting more attention, getting more vocal and popular as well.
Yeah. I know. One of the things that came up when I said that I was speaking with you was the role of women and the way women are regarded in Muslim society, say. The fact that they cover their hair and in some countries they cover their entire body and face. And can you just explain that to us, what it means in the Muslim faith and why women would do that, why they would be encouraged to do that? Mm-hmm. And if they don't do it, are they considered to be, not holy enough?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's very important that we understand that the Islam as a religion, but Muslims as a community have been very much misunderstood. And part of it is because the rhetoric in the media. Part of it is because the reporting in the media, it's very biased. And even when we try to understand Muslims in the West, what we do is we try to understand Muslims with our own perspective, from our own angle and perspective, where we have seen, for example, the church oppressing women, or we have seen that certain religious institutions have been oppressing women. And we assume that maybe this is exactly what is happening in Islam or Muslims, because women there, on the other hand, are covering up their bodies. And we assume that this is probably because they haven't really struggled for women's rights, and they still have to go through these struggles. But that's a very wrong assumption to make. And the reason for that is because, first of all, in Islam, or Islam is a religion of 2 billion people around the world. And some people, when they look at one specific country and whatever is happening in that country, they assume that this is the same for the whole Muslim world. While the Muslim world consists of 56 countries, 2 billion people. Iran does not represent 2 billion people. The policies of Iran, where they tell people that they are forced to cover themselves, does not reflect the experience that is prevalent in the Muslim societies. It reflects an experience in one particular country. Women in Islam, first of all, are equal to men. In fact, there is no reason for Muslims to believe that women have less rights or so. They have equal rights. When you go to the Muslim world, you will find Muslim women practicing all kind of professions, from policymakers in the government, like Pakistan, the country of my parents, has had prime minister, a woman, twice, Benazir Bhutto, and the first university that was established in the world, many people do not know this, was established by a Muslim woman, Fatima Al-Fihri, more than 1,000 years ago, established the first university in the world. The university is called the Al-Qarawiyyin University in Morocco. The wife of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Aisha, was a teacher to thousands of men, teaching them theology, teaching them faith, religion, spirituality. In fact, she was a commander of chief during one of the battles. So she was the commander-in-chief of the whole army, which obviously consists of mostly majority men. As a woman, she led the army. So this idea that women do not have rights is not really true. In Islam, 1400 years ago, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, gave women the right to own property. He gave women the right to not only choose who they want to get married with, but also choose if they wish to divorce from a marriage. So women have the right to divorce as well in our religion. He gave women the right to participate in public civic life. So during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in Medina, there were women that actually were representing their constituency in Medina. And they were able to challenge, for example, they were able to challenge and discuss legislative bills that were being passed through the parliament at that time. So the reason why women have to cover themselves, this is sometimes, asked, like, why do women have to cover? First of all, it's the choice of the women. In religious matters, there is no compulsion. Like, I cannot force my daughter, my wife, to wear the hijab. It's a personal thing. It's between an individual and God. So nobody can force me, for example, to pray 5 times a day. I mean, I have to. As a Muslim, I believe that it is my Muslim duty to pray 5 times a day. As a Muslim, I know that my religious duty is, when I look at women, I can't look with lust and desire. I have to look with respect. The Quran commands, the same verse in the Quran that talks about the dress of women, talks about first about the believing men lowering their gaze, which means that when they look at women, they don't look with evil intention. They look like they would look at anybody without sexualizing them. And then it tells women to cover their bodies, cover up themselves. And women in Islamic world have the right to choose whether they want to follow this or not, because it's a matter of faith. It's a matter of religion. If they wish to follow, and many Muslim women and people don't understand this, they wear the hijab out of their own choice. And there is no such thing that they are forced to wear it. the other thing that you asked is someone who is not wearing the hijab, doesn't cover up themselves, is she less of an individual in terms of respect and honor? Absolutely not. She would be the same like someone who doesn't wear the hijab or wears the hijab. There is no difference. The difference is it's her personal life, personal experience, personal journey within faith. And God is the judge. God is the one that makes the judgment. And the Quran, and God says in the Quran that God knows about the struggles of mankind, and He will judge people according to their efforts, according to how much they the struggles they had and the efforts they went through, they put through. So as a Muslim, I can't judge somebody, even if somebody drinks alcohol, like drinking alcohol is prohibited in Islam. If somebody drinks alcohol, I cannot discriminate that person, because even if it's a Muslim person who drinks alcohol, I cannot discriminate. I have to treat him with the same compassion, with the same love, with the same respect and honor I have to treat someone who doesn't, drink and follows the Quran. So in terms of someone who follows the Quran is more holier, or more, I would say that person may be more practicing, may be perceived by people as someone who is more religious and faithful. But in terms of respect, he will have the same respect as someone who doesn't practice faith, because they're all human beings, aren't they?
Absolutely. The only thing I would ask you about the women covering up bit is that, are they coerced into covering up because it's considered better? And with the whole thing about the Imam should lower his gaze, is that because so that a man, by women covering up, are they helping the men not sexualize them in that way? And therefore, are women coerced into doing it because they feel they have to in order to abide by the rules?
Firstly, the rule, as a Muslim, when I fast in Ramadan, obviously I can talk about the benefits of fasting and tell you about the medical, the spiritual, religious benefits of fasting. But that's not the real objective when I fast. These are extra benefits that I gain. As a Muslim, my whole first duty is to submit to the will of God. That's what a Muslim means, the one who submits to the will of God. And God has commanded in the Quran, commanded to fast. So I'm fasting because of that. God has commanded us to lower gaze to men. I'm not doing it because of whatever benefits they may achieve. I'm doing it because of the commandment of God. So when women are covering up, of course, this is, I think, common sense, that when you have a woman who is dressed up modestly, on the other hand, you have someone who is dressed up with revealing clothes, the one with revealing clothes is going to attract attention that is associated with those type of clothes. That's very natural. It's very, it's very logical.
Okay.
But having said that, the reason why a woman is covering up is not because she doesn't want to get the attention. She doesn't want to get that type of attention. The reason a Muslim woman would cover up is because she believes that it's her duty as a Muslim and it's part of her identity. So when I, as a Muslim man, I'm fasting in Ramadan, or I'm lowering my gaze when I'm walking, I'm doing it because God has commanded me to do so, and it's part of my Muslim identity. Like, I feel Muslim when I do that. When I don't drink alcohol and my friends or colleagues would, have a pint of Guinness, whatever, I would sit with them happily, and I'd not treat them differently. But by not drinking, I would feel that I am actually submitting to the will of God. And this is a personal choice I've made, because I know in the Quran it is prohibited for me to drink alcohol.
Okay.
So it's, I think it's the perspective, how do you look at things? So the way Muslims look at it is because it's God's commandment. So like not consuming pork, for example. Like, we're not allowed to have bake. So we have an Irish breakfast, but without the
rashes and sausages.
well, we could have them, provided they're made of turkey.
Okay.
So instead of bake, instead of pig. So if they're sourced from Turkey, it's all fine. But I know some people say it's not the same. I can't make that judgment. I've never had, I've never tasted the bacon and the pork. But the point is that as a Muslim, I don't eat pork. And of course, today science tells us about all the benefits, of staying away from pork, because it can lead to various different diseases and all that. But irrelevant whether somebody agrees to it or not. These are medical journals talk about the harmful effects on the body when you consume pork. But that's not the reason why I don't eat. I mean, these are extra maybe reasons that may inspire me a little bit more, may motivate me a little bit more. But truly the real inspiration and the real objective, or the real, you could say, the reason I'm not eating pork is because in the Quran, God has commanded us not to eat pork.
And why has he commanded you to do that?
As I said, there could be many reasons for that. For a Muslim, the most important thing is God has commanded us this, and we just do it. But of course, we believe that everything God commands us, there is a wisdom behind it.
Okay.
There is no reason for God to command us something if it was meaningless. We believe it's a meaningful commandment. So if there is any, we call it hukum, which is commandment, in the Quran we believe, or if there is a prohibition, we believe that God is one who created us. He knows his creation the best. So if he has told us to abstain from something, there must be some reasons behind it. And today, as I said, science tells us about the harmful effects consuming too much pork and porcine can have on the human body. But we say that irrespective of all these benefits, the wisdoms, God knows the wisdoms better than anybody else.
So do you submit to that commandment without asking why he might have considered? So I know that we know now about pigs and, the potential health benefits or lack thereof. But was it considered that pigs were dirty animals? Was there a functional reason behind it from years ago?
One of the reasons why pig is forbidden or prohibited is, of course, the commandment of the Quran. But behind it, there is, for example, a jurist ruling that says that pigs itself are impure, najasa. So even by touching it, we'd have to clean ourselves if we want to pray. So technically speaking, it's considered impure. The same applies for alcohol as well, by the way, but not for other things. Like if you have meat that is forbidden for me to consume as a Muslim, but I touch it, I'm still technically in the state of tahara, which is purity. So I don't have to clean myself to pray. And that technical purity is basically just, can you pray without cleaning yourself with water or not? So when I touch pork or alcohol, I can't. So I have to obviously clean myself with water, purify myself before I can then pray.
Okay. We've talked about the pork. Can we talk about alcohol and the reasoning behind it? There's many reasons why someone shouldn't drink alcohol. But is there a reason and a wisdom behind the commandment to not drink alcohol?
The Quran speaks about alcohol in two different ways. Firstly, the prohibition was not revealed to the Prophet Muhammad straight away. In fact, it was a gradual prohibition. First, because consuming alcohol was a norm in the society, in Mecca, in Medina, in Arabia at that time. So people actually would have in their homes, they would have alcohol, they would have wine that they would produce themselves, and it was a very common practice. The Quran speaks first and commanded the believers, the Muslims, "O believers, when you are going to pray, make sure you're not intoxicated." So make sure you're not intoxicated if you're about to pray. So what happens is that in the Islamic way of life, we have to pray 5 times a day. So imagine you have a morning prayer, afternoon prayer, mid-afternoon prayer, you have an evening prayer, and then the night prayer. So 5 prayers throughout the day. When someone is intoxicated, obviously it takes quite a lot, many hours for you to become sober.
Okay.
So automatically this commandment made Muslims drink wisely, drink little than they would otherwise consume throughout the day. But now they would be more careful. Like, when you have to drive after drinking, you do drink, but you're more careful about it. You'll make sure that you drink not beyond that limit, that is allowed, the legal limit. Muslims would do the same because they knew they had to pray. They cannot be intoxicated when they pray because the prayer will be invalid. And after a few years, once they were accustomed to this, when they were used to this, the complete prohibition of alcohol was revealed. And in it, the Quran, God says, "O believers, there is, of course, some benefits in alcohol, but most of them are harmful. So the harmful effects outweigh the benefits of alcohol, and God commands you to stay away from it. So it's from that day that the Muslims stopped drinking wine, stopped drinking alcohol.
Okay, that makes sense. Just back on the dress, and this will the dress of females, and this will kind of lead us more into the whole extremism talk as well. You know, in the likes of, say, the Lebanon, Iran, and Egypt, the dress of ladies and women over the years has changed. So whereas before, like in Iran, you would have seen, say, in the 1960s, 70s, they would have dressed like Westerners, I suppose, and gradually they have been covering themselves up more and more and more. Is there a reason for this, that you see this change?
You're talking about Iran specifically, right?
Iran, well, also Lebanon and Egypt, women would have dressed in more Western clothes.
Have you been to Egypt or Lebanon?
No.
Okay, you should go.
Okay.
Listeners should definitely go to Egypt, because Egypt is an amazing country for tourism. I've been there many, many times. And the dress code of women in Egypt is no different than Europe.
Okay.
I would say the only thing that is more prevalent is they would wear the jeans, they would wear the tops, but they would wear a hijab. They would just cover the hair. So it's very similar to the West here. Iran is a different situation. Now, Iran is a very, I would say, extraordinary circumstances and situation that do not really represent the faith, represent more the political, geopolitical situation at that time. Now, what happened is in Iran, you're right, there were Western dress code was very prevalent at that time during the reign of the Pasha. But people were very unhappy. People were unhappy because of a number of reasons, the lack of social justice, economy, etc. And they said that we have to get rid of this colonial system. We have to get rid of, our values, cultures being imposed by the West, and just us being assimilating to the West. We have to get rid of this. And we believe the ruler is basically who is doing all of this, who is making our society assimilate. Yes, we have Western dresses, but we don't have the freedom that Europe has. We don't have democracy. We don't have the freedoms. We're still under a dictatorship. There is no economic justice. There is no social justice. So people wanted change. At the same time, there was a group that became very vocal, and they were the religious, groups, communities. And their slogan was that we have to go to the Islamic tradition. We have to get rid of this Western tradition. Now, this group that claimed to represent Islam didn't really represent Islam. It represented one particular branch, one particular ideology of Islam, and one that is quite, extreme in many ways. And we've seen that later on. I mean, the experience of women, etc. And so people wanted change. And what happens is when people are very unhappy in any society, and someone comes up and says, well, we'll bring the change, and there is no other substitute, people will vote, people will give vote to that organization, that political party that will say that they will bring change, whoever that is. So people voted for that particular movement. The movement became extremely strong. And the movement, the way they took over was a very violent way, as you know. And people were very, very angry because people wanted change, and people had the feeling, rightfully so, that the American government in particular is making decisions on their behalf and is invading their privacy, invading their democracy, and people wanted to get rid of it. And so America became the enemy, you could say. And on the other hand, you had this religious movement, and people wanted change. They thought maybe this movement will bring that change. Now, the movement became more and more extreme in their rhetoric. On the other hand, the West, America, became more and more extreme in their rhetoric against Iran. What happens is both sides are very extreme in their rhetoric towards each other. But who is really suffering? It's the people. So when the government changed and this religious political party came into power, they imposed a religious lifestyle that was unheard of, that basically is not common in any of the Muslim majority countries. They imposed, for example, the niqab, later on the hijab, and this imposing of dress codes. And it was something that was obviously very problematic. But having said that, that was not really the concern at that time of people. People were happy to have this new way of life. But it's only when they realize that these were all false promises. There is still no democracy. There is still no social justice. There is still really no economic reforms. And under this current regime that has been there for, decades now, I would say, they haven't really seen changes. So there is a need for change right now. Mm-hmm. And I think people have to understand that whoever is in power, they don't want to lose the power. They'll do anything to stay in the position they are in. And if they have to use religion, they'll use religion. If they have to use faith, they'll use faith. They'll do anything to manipulate people's feelings and emotions. And I think the same thing is happening in Israel and Palestine right now, what we are seeing.
Well, this would just lead us into this conversation, which is why I'm delighted, actually. You and I were supposed to sit down a couple of months ago and it didn't work out. Yes. And actually, I think it was meant to be that you came here today, because we can now discuss Palestine and Israel and what is going on there, and your thoughts on what is going on there. And anyone that follows you on Twitter will know exactly how you stand. You're very vocal about the Palestinian cause, what is going on with the people there, and the horror that is unfolding before our eyes. And I as a human being and a mother, watching those videos of those children and mothers and fathers and people, and what's going on there, it's horrific to see it playing out. So can you please discuss with me what is going on, why we've got to where we are, and also why world leaders, I don't think, are coming to the table in terms of what we should be doing for the Palestinian people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think let's go to the start. Let's go to the beginning.
Okay. I'm sitting back here now. Okay?
Yeah. Let's go to the beginning where it all started, because this did not unfold in 2 weeks or a few years. This has been going on for almost a century now. So the Ottomans used to rule in this whole region, which is now Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Palestine, Israel, etc. And the British and the French, both colonial powers, they made an agreement with some Arab nationalists. And they said that if you help us to revolt against the Ottomans, we'll provide you weapons and everything else. So basically, they just followed their very famous strategy of divide and rule. They said, if you will revolt against the Ottomans, we promise you to give you and to make you the owner of the lands. So the Arabs, together with the British and the French, fought the Ottomans, the Ottomans that ruled for many, many centuries. And the Ottomans obviously, lost, and the Ottoman Empire fell down. And the British and the French did not do what they committed, basically. They broke their promises. And instead of giving the land, making all of this one particular region, one country, basically, they divided into different countries. Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Palestine, and Israel did not exist at the time, and Jordan, etc. What happened is that these countries were then still ruled. I mean, they had their own independent leaders, but they were still colonies of the British or the French. Algeria was one of them. And the British, because they were in charge of this territory, which is now today known as Israel and Palestine. At that time, it was just Palestine. They decided that they will allow Jews to, especially after the Second World War, to move to Palestine, migrate. So many European Jews that were victims of the Holocaust, particularly, Second World War, they moved in 1948, 47, 48. They moved all to Palestine. The Palestinians welcomed them all because the Palestinian Christians and Muslims had lived for centuries and centuries with the Jews. They've never had any problems, never had any issues. And these three faith communities have lived together for centuries in that land without any conflict.
Didn't the Palestinians then see the Jews as refugees as well?
Absolutely, they did.
So
yes, they did.
And,
in fact, one of the they were very passionate. The Palestinians were very, very passionate to welcome them. And this is part of the culture. I mean, Palestinian culture, as well as the culture of people living in that whole region, whether Egypt, whether Algeria, Algeria, or Saudi Arabia, is these people are, very generous and very hospitable. Like if they know there's someone who needs food, they'll do anything to feed that person. If they find out somebody needs accommodation, they'll do anything they can to provide accommodation. So they welcome them, and it is only that Britain went back against the commitment, and there was this spell for declaration, and eventually the people that came, they decided, well, we're going to make our own country. And so Israel was established. The establishment of Israel, it's very easy for people to look it up, was a very violent struggle, a struggle where many militant Zionist movements were actively engaged in murdering, killing, and attacking not only the Palestinian Christians or Muslims, even the British at that time. And so eventually Israel came into existence. Now, Israel has come into existence, and since that time, the Palestinians are becoming weaker and weaker. So Israel is getting a lot of support from the West, from especially the US, and this support has been there for many decades.
Is the support there because the money that...
The support is there because Israel is basically, it's like their watchdog, It's like the watchdog of the US in that region. So because of Israel, the US can ensure its influence in the whole region. That's what it is all about. Okay. So eventually the Palestinians, they, in their own country, slowly and surely they became a minority. They were oppressed. The country went through partition. So now you have Palestine. At that time, that was Palestine. Now it's called, majority is called Israel. And then you have Palestinians living in West Bank or in Gaza.
Which aren't even connected.
But they aren't even connected. No, they aren't even connected. And so the land is taken from the Palestinians, and they're all put into two different regions. And Gaza in particular is known as the world's largest open-air prison. And even though Israel went out of Gaza about 15 years ago, still controls electricity, still controls water, still controls power, everything in that region. So this conflict is not new. It's been going on. Palestinians are basically suffering for decades now. They're under occupation. They're under oppression. Systematic ethnic cleansing has taken place in the past, and it's taking place right now as we speak. Because whatever happened on the 7th of October, absolutely, as a Muslim, I condemn, and so does every Muslim should do, the killing of any innocent person. Like innocent people, civilians, even in the time of war, just war, in Islam, are not to be harmed. Like you don't harm women, you don't harm children, you don't harm elderly people. That's absolutely not prohibited in Islam, even in just war. So in this situation, whatever happened on 7th of October, Israel is using this as a justification to commit genocide right now. It is genocide. We can't call it anything else. They stopped all supplies of power, water, food, and then they've told everybody within 24 hours you have to evacuate North Gaza, go to the south. While people were evacuating, they've started bombarding. Right now, as we speak, they've killed more than 8,000 people. More than 20,000 people are injured. Tomorrow, on Friday, I will be going to the Dublin airport because I am going to... a member of our community, Irish-Palestinian person, he lost his wife tragically, was killed 2 days ago.
In this conflict?
Yeah, 2 days ago. He was in Saudi Arabia. He was working in Saudi Arabia while his wife and children were in Gaza. And he was in contact with an American friend of his who happens to be a lawyer in New York. And this lawyer has been to Gaza on many times. He works with the United Nations. So he had a great friendship. And I was contacted just today, this morning, and by this lawyer. And he said, I've found your phone number and I need some help. And he told me that a friend of him who lives in Saudi, who's an Irish Palestinian, who was born in Belfast. He lived his first 15 years of his life in Belfast and then moved back to Gaza because his parents decided to go back. And then he is working in Saudi for about a year. He hadn't seen his family who lives in Gaza. And while he was planning to go back next month, the current situation has happened. His wife, he was in contact with until 2 days ago. They were all living with his parents. Their house was bombarded 2 days ago, and his wife got killed. The children are injured, severely injured. And this gentleman, who is now on his flight tonight to come to Dublin, is going to come to Dublin tomorrow morning. I'll be there to receive him with some other members to provide him with the emotional support that he needs. The psychological support that he needs.
And he can't get his children and the rest of his family out of there?
No, he can't. Because Israel is not allowing anybody safe passage. Because that's not... The whole purpose of this operation is nothing to do with Hamas. I mean, Hamas was... First of all, Hamas is basically... I would say it's a child, it's a baby of Israel. Now, why do I say that? If Israel wouldn't occupy, wouldn't oppress, wouldn't... treat the Palestinians in this way that it treats, Hamas would not exist. Hamas only exists because of Israel's policies and apartheid. If the apartheid of Israel is gone, and if Israel starts treating Palestinians as human beings with justice and equality, there is no reason for people to join militant groups as Hamas. Why would anybody want to join a militant group? Everyone, no matter who you are, what color, what faith you have, everybody wants to live in peace. We just want to get on. We just want to have a family. We just want to, give our children the best that we can, make the world a better place. That's what every single person wants. Those people in the north that were fighting during the Troubles, they didn't do so because they were happy to do so. They were forced to do so. They didn't have any choice, but it's only, I believe, through the peace process. And the peace process is something that both parties have to acknowledge that they did wrong. In this situation, the Palestinians have accepted Israel. They have acknowledged the existence of Israel. On the other hand, Israel is not accepting Palestine, is not accepting the two-state solution. United Nations have said on many times, there has been so many resolutions, more than 60 resolutions of the United Nations that Israel has completely violated without any repercussions. And that's the issue, that the Western world, when it came to Russia invading Ukraine, supported Ukraine, rightfully so. We opened our borders. We welcomed people. I'm not saying that we should open our borders. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is at least we can be united in calling the oppressor the oppressor. At least we can say enough is enough. At least we can say what Israel is doing is not acceptable and there needs to be actions taken. The world leaders are not talking about the genocide. They're all going back and saying Israel has the right to defend itself. Well, Israel is not defending itself. This is not defending itself. Killing innocent people, children, and bombarding the whole region. That's not defending yourself.
When you look at anything that comments are made upon, particularly if it's made by a Jewish person, a lot of them, there's a lot of them calling for a ceasefire, yes. But then some of them are saying we need to kill Hamas, but we need to get the hostages back too. But how can we get the hostages back safely
when
if we're going
everybody?
in killing everyone? Surely
Absolutely.
They acknowledge themselves that those hostages could die as well.
It's very clear they don't want, they're not interested in the hostages. They're interested in killing as many Palestinians as they can and taking over Gaza, taking over the region and expanding Israel's territories. That's what it is all about, really. This is not about religion. This is not about Jews versus Muslims, because Christians are also affected. Many Palestinians are Christians. Their churches are being bombarded as well. And the irony is that people say, if you criticize Israel, you're anti-Semitic. That's not true, because I have so many friends, you see, they are Jews. And there are so many Jews that I know that speak up against Israel. You've seen online as well.
Of course, yeah.
So they speak out, they don't agree with what Israel is doing. And whatever happened on the 7th of October was terribly wrong.
Yeah.
But we have to really address the root cause. To talk about this conflict and talk from 7th of October, starting from 7th of October, is really injustice to this conflict. It's really wrong, because we will never be able...
I've heard a comment saying, if you kick a dog enough, it'll eventually bite back.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
but
that is not an excuse for what Hamas did to those innocent Israeli people. But a line does need to be drawn in the sand, doesn't it?
Well, the reality is that Palestinians are going through this for 65, 70 years. As I said, this is not something that started a few years ago. This has been going on generations. You've got like the 4th or 5th generation living under occupation. They are really born with the conditions of occupation. Nobody needs to teach them hatred. They are going to learn that by itself when they're being treated in that way, when they can't even visit family members that live in other regions, because they have to go through every kilometer or so has a checkpost by Israeli soldiers in Gaza, in West Bank. And they have to go through it.
Is that because of Palestinian suicide bombers as well from...
As I said, these are all lame excuses. The reality is, once you end the occupation, once you end the oppression, you're eliminating the root cause of everything, of the whole conflict. And that's when people will realize and will start to talk about peace. You cannot talk about peace when you have the occupation or the oppression still continuing. In the Northern Ireland, when we had the troubles, the partition had happened already. The oppression had to stop before some progress was made in the peace negotiations. And the different forms of discrimination that existed against the Catholic community, they were addressed. And after being addressed, it gave the trust to the Catholic community that, look, yes, they are serious about peace now. And this is when we saw that, the IRA, for example, they got rid of their weapons. And you can travel to Belfast and Newry now, and it's unbelievable. Like, you could not imagine 40 years ago.
Oh, sure. I remember growing up as a kid, because my parents are from the north and my dad's from Belfast. And I remember growing up as a kid, and there was the checkpoints, the army were there. It was actually scary going through. But you can't imagine it being any other way than it is now. And it is wonderful that we got to that stage. But we got to that stage as well. The Americans helped us too. So
the Americans helped Ireland, but Americans don't want to help Palestinians and Israelis, I would say, because they're doing an injustice not only to the Palestinians, but also to the Israelis. The common Israeli doesn't want war. They want to just live peacefully like everybody else. Not everybody is a Zionist, in the sense of that they hate Palestinians, they hate Arabs, they dehumanize them. These are extremists, and they happen to be in government now, unfortunately, in Israel. The government is fascist government, is a far-right fascist government that is very vocal, very open about the way they dehumanize Palestinians.
But they were voted in by the majority of Israelis, yeah?
They were voted in, yes. And as I said, what happens is that sometimes people that want to create division and hatred are the ones that are the most vocal. And when they have the support of the US, because this really facilitates the plan of the US, what the US wants. The US wants conflict in this region. The US doesn't want peace. If the US wanted peace, peace would be taking place right now. But the US, it's not in the interest of the US policy to have, no conflict there. The conflict Where are the arms coming from? Where are the weapons coming from?
I know. War is big business as well.
It's a big business, absolutely.
And,
yes.
and then the rebuilding of a nation after war is a huge business as well.
And
Look
this
what
is
happened
something
in
that
Iraq.
happens after every 10, 15 years in Gaza. Every 10, 15 years, Israel bombards the whole, areas and regions. These areas and regions are then built, and it takes years and years to build them. And then after 10 years, something happens again, and again, everything is being bombarded. So you have weapons that are being supplied. You have also a lot of construction work going on. So who is it really benefiting? Organizations such as Hamas, people will, that live there, they might feel that this is the only way to respond to, if somebody has lost his wife and all children by Israel, that person has nothing left to live for. No motivation except revenge. And that person doesn't care, would not care about ethics, morality. He would just want to make sure that he does the same to those that are responsible. That could be the Israeli army, could be the government, whatever. So Israel, by its current policy of ethnic cleansing and genocide, is facilitating people to radicalize. It's feeding into that hatred, and if Hamas will grow after this, don't be surprised. Don't be surprised.
I know, it's just crazy. We touched on political leaders and the Palestinian cause and the fact that I would see that they're not speaking up enough. What do you think about the political leaders in Ireland and how they have spoken about the situation? Do you think that they could be doing more?
First of all, I want to commend our Taoiseach, our President Higgins and the Taoiseach for speaking out in solidarity for the Palestinian people, and also speaking out against the Israeli violation of international law. But at the same time, I believe that while our government has been one of the few governments in Europe that has spoken very clearly in solidarity with Palestinians and also against Israeli violation of international law, I think we can do more than that. Currently, for the past many years, actually, there is a bill that has not been passed yet, not made legislation, which is the Occupied Territories Bill. I believe that the right response at this time would be to pass this bill and to make it, legislation. And by doing so, it will send a very strong message of solidarity to the Palestinians and also send a strong message to Israel that, we as a nation will not accept oppression, occupation, and partition. And we will not accept this happening. Like we took a stance against apartheid many decades ago. When that was happening in South Africa, Ireland was one of the few countries in the world that took a very strong stance. And I think it's time for Ireland to take a strong stance against apartheid that is happening right now and the genocide.
And why hasn't this bill been passed?
Well, interestingly, most of the parties, whether it's Sinn Féin, it's Labour, Fianna Fáil, they've all agreed with it. They've all approved it. It's just Fine Gael. It's just one political party that is an obstacle. And I believe that they should now do the right thing.
Do you know why they haven't passed it? Why are they obstructing it?
Well, apparently there is one politician involved who was a minister who is very, very vocal in his support with Israel. Of course, there is a person can support someone, but support humanity, which is the most important thing. You could be you could be someone who is of the Muslim faith, but why should I have to support Iran if Iran is doing something wrong? I'll support humanity first. The same thing applies if someone is coming from a background that a Jewish background. Support humanity. Don't support, someone who just belongs to the same faith community.
Well, I've heard Alan Shatter speak on the radio about what's going on as well, and he's very pro-Israel and what they're doing. So,
well, it means he's very pro-genocide. He's very pro-ethnic cleansing. He's pro-occupation, pro-oppression. That's what it means. I don't see it any other way. I believe Palestinians and Israelis both have equally the right to human rights. They're all sacred. They're all human beings. They should be treated equally. Israelis have the right to exist peacefully, and so have Palestinians. And to choose one over the other, what Alan Shatter is doing is something very wrong. It's very un-Irish for him to do so.
We see a lot of men talking, apart from Ursula von der Leyen, which, you know, I don't think she's stood up and said about standing by the Israelis, which I don't think many people in Ireland would agree with. But there's lots of men talking. There's very few women in the conversation. Do you think that if women had more roles in leadership, that the world would even look the way it does at the minute? I am a strong believer in if women were allowed or were encouraged to be at the table more. It's difficult for a woman to go into politics. We know this. Women that are politicians say it's difficult. It's hard work. They get abused online an awful lot. A lot of actually violent sexual comments made towards them on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever it is that may be. So it is tricky, and they haven't been encouraged to be part of leadership, to be at the table when it comes to leadership. Do you think that if more women were involved, that it would be a different place, that there'd be more compassion, more care, more love?
I actually agree with that, but I would say that women empowerment is not just having a woman as the head of the European Commission. It's not about just ticking the box. If it's the men that will make the decisions, if it's the men that will actually make the actual decisions, and just put a lady in front to read out a statement, that's not really women empowerment. When we talk about women empowerment, it means for them to be genuinely in these roles where they are able to make decisions. They are able to make these decisions where it really matters. Then I'm all for it. And I believe strongly that if women are part of decision-making roles and policy-making, a majority, then definitely the world would have been a different place. Because naturally speaking, women are they have more empathy, they have more compassion, they have more sympathy also, and this is part of human nature. Women tend to be blessed by God more than men in that sense.
I was talking to people there, and just a number of days ago, and I was saying no mother gives birth to a son for them to go out and either kill or be killed.
Absolutely.
And that's actually such a valid point, isn't it?
That's a very strong and very powerful point, because a woman has gone through, bearing the child for 9 months, and then the delivery, and then the nourishing of the child for the next year or two at least. So women know how difficult, how sacred human life is, how much pain and suffering goes through to make that child come alive and be born, and then to look after it. They know how it is. So for them to think of unaliving human life, it's not something they do very easily compared to men.
I know. I think it is definitely something to consider. I think Claire Daly is an amazing politician. I'd love to get her on my podcast. She speaks very strongly, and she's got views that, and I think in a way Claire has been silenced. She's been, ridiculed as well in the Irish media. And anyway, shout out if anyone can get Claire Daly on my podcast, I'd love it. We've spoken about Hamas, and we've spoken about the other groups, I suppose, like Hezbollah. We haven't actually mentioned them specifically, but obviously these extremist groups, they gather momentum, and often people would see those extremist groups as that's what depicts Muslims in the world. But you've already said that it's very far from the truth, and it's often the extremists that shout the loudest. But in actual fact, to me anyway, and any Muslim person that I've come in contact with, it's a very peaceful society. It's very much about including everyone, and even the way you've spoken on your the tweets that you put out and everything, it is very much about inclusivity, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think diversity itself that we have in humanity is God's will. It's divine will. And to be different doesn't mean that someone is in any way inferior or superior, for that matter. The Quran is very clear on this, saying that all humanity is created from God. God created humanity and then divided them into different tribes, different identities, not because one is better than the other, but so they can learn from each other. So I think what we need is more learning, more understanding of each other. It can happen through education, but most importantly, through interaction, engagement. People that have beliefs about or assumptions about Muslims or perceptions about Muslims, I would say before these perceptions and prejudice that you have, please do meet a Muslim. please interact with a Muslim and base your perception of Muslims on that experience. And you will see that it'll be completely in contrast to what you've seen in the media, what you see usually. So that's about it. I mean, look, the current conflict in the Middle East has given rise to anti-Semitism, given rise to Islamophobia in the whole world. And I think as people of faith in particular, we must come together and say, look, whether we are Jews or Muslims, we are all equally involved in this, and we need to initiate the peace process. Whatever we can do to initiate peace, whatever we can do to ensure ceasefire, we must work together. And if there is something that happens, it doesn't matter who does it, that is wrong, you must condemn it.
You met the chief rabbi in Austria there recently.
I met the chief rabbi of Austria in Seville.
Oh, that was
in Spain.
Sorry, yes.
In Spain, yes.
Okay.
So I'm one of the founding members of the Muslim Jewish Leadership Council, the MJLC, which is a European council of rabbis and imams. And we meet occasionally, and we had a meeting a few weeks ago in Spain, Seville. And it was very interesting because Seville and Spain is that region where 1,000 years ago, Muslims and Jews and Christians lived peacefully. And the era is, for the Jewish community, is known as the Golden Era, because this is when the Jewish community flourished a lot in terms of intellectual academia, in terms of even their own sciences. They flourished a lot, and they refer to that era as the Golden Era. So we had a meeting there, and in that meeting, again, we had the same feelings and we had the same message that anti-Semitism is growing, Islamophobia is growing, and this is not acceptable. We should not allow the conflict that is taking place in the Middle East, the hatred that is being prevalent there, we should not allow it to be to come and here in Europe and affect our lives. And we should, in fact, be the ones that play a very important role in bringing peace here, but also bringing peace in that region, because we can have a very important role. We can be vocal. And I think the more vocal we are for peace, the more effective it will be. We don't have to choose sides. The chief rabbi has family members in Israel. He doesn't have the nationality, but he has never lived there, but he has family members. So obviously for him, Israel is an important country. I'm sure he loves Israel. For me, Palestine is a very important country because Palestinians not only happen to be Muslim, but also in Palestine itself, the third holiest, most sacred site of Islam is in Palestine. And they have been under occupation for 100 years. So obviously, Palestine is close to my heart. But Israel equally, I believe they should have all the freedom to live peacefully. Israel is a reality right now.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as, we believe Israel should be wiped off the face of the earth. I mean, no, nothing like that. Israel should exist, but Palestine should also equally exist. And Palestine should exist according to the UN resolutions, which Israel is violating. And once, I think, both parties, the Palestinians have already done so, acknowledged what the UN is saying. Once Israel starts following and abiding by the UN resolutions, I think that's the way forward to have peace. Otherwise, we may have ceasefire, please God, quickly, but the conflict is not, it hasn't ended. It means that maybe after a few months, years, again, we'll have thousands and thousands of Palestinians being killed, or maybe hundreds of Israelis being killed. The loss of one innocent life, whether it's Israeli or Palestinian, is too much. It's not acceptable. And that's the message that should go out.
Is there a chief rabbi in Ireland, and do you have a relationship with him?
The chief rabbi of Ireland, I know him personally, yes. I haven't actually spoken to him since this conflict, but he's a good friend.
Okay. Do you think that the Catholic Church is doing enough? Do you think that the Pope is doing enough in terms of this conflict, or do you think that there could be more done? I suppose there could always be more done, couldn't there?
I think the reality is that as faith leaders, we can motivate and inspire our faith communities. But when it comes to politics, when it comes to these conflicts, the real action and the real differences can be made by our policymakers. If our policymakers themselves are not interested in peace, which is the case in the US, which is the case in the UK, by the way, as well.
Because we haven't actually discussed the UK. The UK they're not doing a very good job of this.
I think the UK is really trying to reflect its past to be like it was British colony, to be a voice for occupation, for partition. That's what it's doing. It's not the UK that we have seen in the past, before Brexit. I think after Brexit, the UK has lost the plot, to be honest. Yes, they may have somebody who has a brown skin color, but that didn't make any difference because it seemed that there is a saying in Urdu which means Shah se zyada Shah ke wafadar, which means that if you have a person who is an outsider and suddenly you put him in a position of power, he'll try to assimilate so much that he'll do things that even those that were before him, they will not do. So that's what's happening right now. I mean, with Braverman and the Prime Minister in the UK, the way they are responding to this violence, it's like, that's not, I think maybe 100 years ago, the British Prime Minister would have been a bit more compassionate, a little bit more humane.
Yeah, I agree. I just have a couple of other little questions about Muslim people and Islam in general before we
I hope that a part of that we can talk about Ireland in general as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, we will.
We have obviously the housing crisis, we have a health crisis, we have an economy crisis in the country, and I think these are important things as well to talk about.
They are, aren't they? And even it was just last night. I was in a restaurant just down the road with my family, and there was a young man, and he's been a waiter in that restaurant for, I'd say, the past couple of years. A lovely chap. He's about 23, and he was saying to me he's going to Australia in January. And we were like, why are you going to Australia? He goes, because I cannot buy a house here. He goes, I'm 23, I'm still living at home. Yeah. All my friends are still living at home. Like, I had a house when I was 23. Yeah. And he said that there's just no end in sight. There's absolutely no way that they would ever be able to afford to live anywhere in Dublin near where they want to go. So they're just all going abroad. He's done economics, he's got an economics degree, he's got a master's, but there's no life for him here, he said. Isn't that the brain drain is real, isn't it?
It is the reality. It's a sad, tragic reality of our country. Young people are moving out to Australia, to other parts of the world, even to the Middle East. I've met many that have moved to Saudi, to Dubai, because here at home, they feel that they can't go on the property ladder. Forget the property ladder. They can't even afford to have their own house on rent.
Yeah.
Which is an irony. I moved 2004 when I came to Ireland. I was shocked at the prices of rent. At that time, for a 4-bed house, you'd pay €1,000, €1,100, which is a lot. Mm-hmm. I had come from the Netherlands, where houses were €300-400 a month. And now the situation is obviously you can't even find a house if you're willing to pay €2,500 or €3,000 a month in areas such as Blanchardstown, Dublin 15, in Lucan, I know in the city centre. It's very, very difficult. I think there is a big gap in the country, a gap between people that work and people that don't work. I'm sorry, I have to say that. I meant there is a very little gap.
Okay.
There's a very little gap.
Yeah.
So if you start working and you're 23, you're earning how much? 30,000, 35,000?
Well, I suppose it depends on which area you're
going into. But even if let's say you're earning 50,000, which is really a lot. Very few people do that, by the way, when you're 23. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult for you to live in Dublin, in County Dublin, and find a house on rent. It's going to be a very, very big challenging thing. Most people do not earn like that. Most people are earning approximately around 30,000 in that region. In the Netherlands, if you earn 30,000, you could easily rent a house. You could actually not only rent a house, you have enough money to even go on holidays once or twice a year. In Ireland, the situation is different. The salaries are not relative to the expenses that we have. On the other hand, the gap there is very little gap between people that work, people that don't work. So sometimes staying at home for some people is there is no difference between them and working.
Do you mean people that would be on social welfare?
Yes.
Okay.
So sometimes people that are on social welfare, the support they get from the government is very, very close, if not more, to the basic income, which is very strange. The basic income, somebody who's actually working 40 hours a day, going to commute to work, and then 40 hours a week works, that person makes almost equivalent to what you could get from the social welfare. That's an issue as well. The people that are on the social welfare, they get still support from the government, in terms of housing, etc., which is much needed. I'm not saying that I'm against it, but I'm saying that people that actually work do not get that support. They have to fork out the money from their own pockets. They may get, on few schemes that they may get ransom, supplementary rent, whatever, but that may not really help them, because at the end of the day, they're thinking, well, I may be able to rent, but I have to then rent outside of Dublin. I have to go 30, 40 minutes away from Dublin. The commuting, and then on the other hand, even if I live in Dublin and I'm living hand to mouth, but after 5 years, I cannot own a property. I cannot get on the property ladder. On the other hand, if I go to Australia, if I go to Dubai, I may actually make more money and also pay less taxes, and also accommodation is much cheaper. I'll be able to also save money to buy a house. So obviously people will choose for that route. It's a disgrace, to be honest, because our people, Irish people, have to go away from their families. I mean, one of the worst things to do, I have lived away from my family when I was young, and I know how it is. Living away from your family, from your parents, from your uncles, aunts, your siblings, it's not something you do very easily. You do it really if you have no choice. So young people, if they're going because they have no choice. They don't want to go. So the government has to really they have to bring policies in where people that are starting to earn money, that salary should be enough for them to be able to live here, but also be able to buy property. To be able to buy property, to be able to go on the property ladder and make this country that is their homeland, their native country, also a country where they can really have their home. Yeah. If you can't have your home in the country that you are born and you're forced to go outside, abroad, that's a shame. I mean, I think that's from the policymakers, from the government. They have failed, but it's a failure.
It seems to have been something that's going on and on and on, and there's almost no end in sight. I did have a gentleman on who was speaking about the housing crisis, and I've yet to release his podcast. It'll probably go out after yours, because I wanted yours to go out as quickly as I could get you in the seat, just given the circumstances. But it does seem just failure after failure, doesn't it? And, almost like our hands are tied.
Well, our hands aren't really tied. Willingness, that's what's lacking. We have a 16 billion surplus in the budget. And despite that, we aren't able to solve the housing crisis. We aren't able to increase salaries. Why not? I think it's more to do with the willingness of the government. And I really hope that, the next elections will see some change. We'll see some positive change in Ireland in terms of the way we are governed, and in terms of, making a difference in terms of housing, in terms of healthcare. I mean, it's unbelievable and it's unacceptable for people to be on a waiting list for 2 years. Sometimes in the meantime, while you're waiting to see the consultant, that medical issue that you have may expand, may increase.
Oh, yeah, sure. It can often lead on to so many comorbidities.
So many other diseases.
And mental health issues are a huge issue.
Absolutely. It's not acceptable that in a country that has 16 billion surplus in the budget, people have to wait 2 years to see a consultant. And not everybody can afford private healthcare. But everybody deserves to see a consultant when they need to, whether they have private healthcare or not, because everyone's life should be regarded as equal. And when in a country people there are some people, because they earn more money, because they have private healthcare, they're able to see the consultant within a month, and other people have to wait 2 years. I believe there is something wrong fundamentally in the way humans are treated in our country. That needs to change. So we can all talk about we have human rights, but do we really have human rights? So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, inflation. I mean, inflation is something that has affected us all. Yes, prices went up, oil and of fuel, etc., but also they have come back down. We have seen the increase of prices of products in the supermarket, groceries, etc. We haven't seen them coming back.
And it is actually unbelievable how much a grocery shops cost these days.
I completely agree with you. I remember going to Lidl or Aldi, and doing a lot of grocery for only €50. A
Yeah,
lot of grocery.
yeah.
And for a €50 now, I could buy only quarter of that I used to buy before. And I'm not even talking about Dunnes stores and Tesco's, because we all know that obviously their prices are much higher than Lidl and Aldi. But yeah, this is affecting everybody. And the government needs to really take the leadership role in saying that, look, yes, we understand businesses have to earn profits, but you cannot exploit the economic crisis that the world went through for your profits. Profiteering to that level shouldn't be acceptable. There should be some laws that would protect households, protect people, because it's about the protection of people. If people have to pay so much for their groceries, while on the other hand, the fuel prices have come down, we have a 16 billion surplus, which I've mentioned many times, and people are still worried about should we actually switch on the heating in the winter or not? Because we might not do it because otherwise we can't pay the bills. If people have to live like this in our country, in Ireland, that's not acceptable. That's a failure of the government. So I would say that people are angry. People are upset. This anger can be easily exploited by others, and they would easily make migrants the scapegoats, make refugees scapegoats, that it's because of the Ukrainians, it's because of the refugees. It's not. It's because of the failures of the government. And let's address that. Let's come together to bring change in the next elections, whenever that happened, in terms of change.
So vote with our whichever box that we tick, and you think that you believe that could happen. Would you run for government yourself?
Would I run for government? I don't know. I mean, I haven't really thought about it. I have been asked a few times by some political parties whether I'm interested in joining them and participating in public life. I think the past 2 years, I've actually thought a lot about it, especially with the housing crisis, but the health crisis and inflation. And I've actually thought that, look, what am I really inspired to? I have a very successful business, by the way. I mean, I am not only the chairperson of the Irish Muslim Peace Integration Council or the chief Imam, I have my own separate business, which is very successful. And
what is it? Do you mind me asking? Or?
It's food certification.
Okay.
So we do food safety certifications. We do halal certifications as well.
And actually, sorry, I have to say now, while you're here, we're actually in the studio with a lovely lady.
Yes.
And it's the first time I've actually had an audience for the podcast. Yes. And actually, saying about women's rights as well, you were very vocal. You said, I want to come in and sit in on the conversation. So and this lady is from Pakistan.
She is, yes. She's a trainee auditor in the company, in my company. So as I said, that in terms of achievements, I've achieved what most people would want in their life. But still, I think that if there is something I can give to the community, that would give me more satisfaction. That would really make me happy from inside, because it means that if I have been given by God certain talents, abilities, I should utilize them to make the society a better place. So, I mean, I haven't really made a decision, but I am thinking about, I might, because maybe in a position of leadership, political leadership, you might be able to bring the change that you want to see in the society.
Maybe consider going as an independent, would you? Or would you need to be with a party, do you think?
I would say going with the party would be, I mean, independent, of course, this is another road, but I would say if I would go, I would go probably with the party. That doesn't mean I'm against any party. I may not agree with some parties. That's true. Independent, I think, would be quite challenging. It's very tough. But also independently, are you really able to make a difference? Because you have your own independent voice. But once you're with a political party, within the party you can have your influence, and you can then, through your influence, change the policy of the party. And if that happens, then you don't have only one person, one vote. You may have 20 or 30 votes towards that policy direction.
Fair enough. Well, listen, I'll be watching out for that. There was two things that I wanted to talk to you about before we wrap up. One was the integration of Muslim children and the encouragement of that into normal Irish society. Is that a thing, or do people in the Muslim faith tend to stick to themselves. And then also I want to talk to you about the LGBTQI plus their rights and how they are viewed within Muslim society.
Sure. Okay.
So you pick whichever one you want to talk about first.
Let's talk about the integration first. The integration of Muslim children is not really an issue. I mean, we have Muslim children playing, in the GAA, affiliated with the GAA, playing hurling, etc.
Oh, sure, they're on my boys' teams. Yes. There's loads of little boys on my boys' hurling and Gaelic teams. Yeah.
So in terms of, integration, I mean, they speak not only English. I mean, many of the Muslim children that I meet, they are very, very fluent in Gaelga, and I'm like, I need to learn from these kids. So in terms of integration, I don't see an issue. I mean, they go to schools that are very mixed, irrespective of the denomination. Even if a school has, and there are 2 primary schools in Dublin that have a Muslim denomination, the children come from all different backgrounds, all different faiths, and they integrate with each other, learn from a young age about diversity, about, our differences, and they learn how to celebrate our differences. And when they go to secondary school and when they go to the workplace, there is diversity everywhere. We live in a very pluralist society. So in terms of integration, I see integration issues mainly in societies where there is no community cohesion. So where you have a society where there is institutional racism, I think that's where integration issues will emerge. France, for example.
Oh, I was just going to say it. It's on the tip of my tongue, yeah.
And you will find areas where there is, people from one area living together under socially deprived conditions. That's where you'll have integration issues, because there you have us versus them narrative. People that are born and bred, they may not feel that they're part of the society because they're, being discriminated against. But thank God in Ireland, there is nothing like that. In Ireland, and we are in many ways very fortunate that the minority communities that came to our country, they were the individuals were very educated, as I said, a lot of medical professionals, and we speak the English language. Everybody, is able to speak English language that comes usually. We have seen that some refugees are finding it difficult, but there are classes, there are so many initiatives they can participate in. But I think the government can do a little bit more in terms of integration, because I believe that in certain parts where they have settled refugees, they have given them accommodation, they've given them basic fundamental needs, but in terms of mental health, in terms of helping them to integrate, helping them to understand Ireland, the culture of Ireland, and to engage with the local communities, that's not happening. And I think because of the lack of that, you find some people protesting, because they'll be like, suddenly the hotel next door that used to be a hotel where we have tourists arriving, suddenly there is no tourists in the town. And in the hotel, we have people that do not engage with us, do not communicate with us. And often it's not because these people do not want to communicate. It's because these people are afraid. Yeah. These people have come from other countries and they are in a completely strange society. So they are a stranger, and we need to, embrace the stranger. But we need the government to also help to get rid of any misunderstandings. And they can do that by having initiatives of integration, by like the Nordic model, the model in Norway or Denmark or even Germany is very fantastic. I mean, there they have refugees. If they are living in certain towns, in hotels, the whole community is involved. There are different activities. They are involved with, these are sports activities, these are other educational activities, learning the German language, etc. And the communities, once they meet these individuals, they realize, they're not a threat to us. Yeah. They're just normal human beings trying to make a better life. I think that's something that we need in terms of integration, because integration is a two-way process. It's not just the minorities learning the language, learning the culture, but it's also the larger society, the larger community to try to be accommodating and also try to understand and learn from the minorities. And whenever we have seen throughout Europe, look, I came 20 years ago in Ireland. I remember there weren't many places where I could have some, cuisine that I would really like. There was, of course, I could get the potatoes and fish and chips, but that wasn't really something that I was happy to eat every single day. Yeah. So right now, Look at Dublin. I mean, you've got restaurants from Syria, Egyptians, Polish, you've got so many different cuisines.
Yeah.
So the minority communities with them bring with them also lovely cuisine, their beautiful experiences, the culture. And it's something that makes our society, I think multicultural society makes it more beautiful. A multicultural society, it doesn't mean that the Irish identity is going to be eliminated. Absolutely not. I mean, we have the Eid in Croke Park every year. And the Eid in Croke Park is our demonstration that you could be Irish and Muslim at the same time.
Eid is
the annual
Christmas
festival.
type
It's
thing.
the Christmas type of thing. It's our annual festival. We have women, we have children that proudly have the Irish flags. They speak Gaeilge, they speak Irish as well. And we have our political leaders, we have our faith leaders come together, all people coming together just to celebrate Eid, to send a strong message. And we do that in Croke Park, of course, a very iconic Irish, venue, and to show that, look, you could be Irish and Muslim at the same time. A message to the Irish community and also a message to the Muslim community that you can be Irish also, not just Muslim. So integration, that's the kind of my thoughts about integration. Going to the other question that was about the LGBTQI.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I think people have to understand that it doesn't matter what religion or what culture, what race, what lifestyle, what sexuality a person has. A person should not be treated differently because of that. We must try to have more understanding. We must not treat somebody different because of that. We should treat everybody with respect, everybody with dignity. I may not agree with somebody's faith, somebody's belief. Somebody else may not believe or may not agree with my views, and they may believe that this is all nonsense, not to eat pork, not to drink alcohol. It's all nonsense. It's all rubbish.
We love our rashers on our Guinness.
That's fine. I mean, that's grand. I mean, no problem. The same way I could have the same belief that, I think this is not right. But at the same time, we should be able to live together peacefully. We should be able to work together peacefully for a better society. And we should not discriminate. We should not teach hatred. Like, I'm not supposed to be teaching other people, you know what, that faith, we should not respect them. That's not my job. I should try to bring, an atmosphere of understanding, mutual understanding. Like, you know what, let's sit down with them. Let's bring the priest in the mosque. Let's bring the rabbi in the mosque. That's what I did a few years ago. A few years ago, I invited a Holocaust survivor, Tommy Reichenthal, in the mosque. It was Ramadan, a very special moment for us. And we welcomed Tommy Reichenthal in the mosque. And for many Muslims, it was the first time to have listened to a Holocaust survivor about their, tragic history and experience in the camp. For Tommy Reichenthal, it was the first time that he met Muslims in the mosque. And in fact, when I invited him, he was like, "Are you serious, Sheikh? Are you going to invite me, a Jewish person, to the mosque?" And I said, "Yes, why not?" And it was a surprise for him too. But the experience was amazing. He was warmly embraced. And he, on the other hand, also, reflected that with his love and welcome. I've invited him to my home as well. We have great friendship. In fact, Tommy Reichenthal was a very vocal voice when we had the Syrian refugee crisis. So he, in fact, was the one that used to say on the media, we should accept Syrian refugees. What does it matter if they are Muslim? They're still human beings, aren't they? So I believe in a society of pluralism, society where people can have different ways of living, and different views and beliefs and different sexualities, but they should all be treated with love and respect. I must say that last year, unfortunately, our country witnessed horrific crime committed by an individual against two gay men in Sligo, and they were absolutely horrific. As soon as I found out that the perpetrator had a name that, I assumed it was a Muslim, I not only, attended a vigil, I attended a vigil in front of the Dáil with the LGBTI groups and movements to show solidarity with them. But I also spoke about it in the mosque, in the Islamic Centre, how this is absolutely not acceptable. And I mean, it's common sense for most Muslims. We have 100,000 Muslims in the country. And there was one incident. And this particular person, the perpetrator of this crime, has mental health issues, etc. But it's not something that is motivated by faith. So people may assume, oh, he did it because that's what his faith taught. Absolutely not. I mean, I have people that I know that are homosexual, that are gay, that are lesbian. They're human beings. I respect them. I love them. I cherish them like I would cherish anybody else. I may not, for example, engage myself in any sexual activity that is considered homosexual, or but that doesn't matter that if somebody does that, I would treat them differently. No, they're still human beings. I think people have this misunderstanding that Islam
or is homophobic.
Is homophobic religion.
Yeah.
No, it's not. I mean, look, our books, the books of jurisprudence of Islam, they discussed 1,000 years ago, 1,300 years ago, about transgenders. They were so there were different discussions, and so the jurists, they say they have the same rights as either male or female. They didn't categorize them as a third gender, but they did say, and this is in terms of inheritance. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to inheritance, how much will they inherit? Will it be the part of the male or the part of the female? Because the part of the female and male is different in Islam. And the reason for that is because the female will inherit not only from her husband, but also from her brothers and also from her father, while the husband will not inherit anything from the wife at all. Only from the parents. So because of these rulings, they were discussing 1,200 years ago what would be the inheritance, the part of the inheritance for a transgender person. And then there was amazing discussions about it depends on the inclination of the person. If the person is inclined to male, then it would be the male part. If it would be inclined towards the female, then the inheritance would be according to female. And it's amazing that they were so, you could say, woke. Tolerant and
so
woke. Oh, absolutely. They were so woke, yes. And people, they assume that the Islamic world is asleep. But no, they were woke. And they had these discussions. So somebody is a transgender. Look, I personally, and Muslims, have no issues with anybody that is member of the LGBTI community. But on the other hand, we believe that we should not be forced or imposed to believe in any particular way. So for example, like we don't believe, as a Muslim, I don't believe that I can impose my way of life to you. Like if I say I don't drink alcohol, you should also believe that drinking alcohol is not right. If I do this, it's imposing my faith. That's not right. That's not acceptable. Similarly, if somebody, for example, from the LGBTI community says, well, you cannot believe that homosexual activity is a sin. That's like imposing their way on me. Like, irrespective of what I believe about it, I shouldn't treat you differently. But my belief, I should be entitled to my belief. So in Islam, a homosexual activity is sodomy, to be specific. So anal sex, that's forbidden in Islam. Even between a husband and wife, it's prohibited. So between a male and male, of course, it's prohibited also. So that's forbidden. It's haram. It means it's prohibited explicitly. We believe it to be prohibited. But that doesn't mean if somebody engages in that type of sexual activity that we will treat them differently. It's like eating pork. Like, I believe eating pork is prohibited. But that doesn't mean if you're eating bacon sandwich in front of me that I'll be like, oh my God, like, what is happening here? No, nothing will be changed. I will not treat you differently. I'll just sit down and, enjoy my cup of tea or whatever I have.
like would you have? Can a homosexual though be out in the Muslim community and be, pray with you and live with you and eat with you and can they, or do they have to stay?
Well, there is two ways of looking at it. First of all, a person who is homosexual, it's a personal, private thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like if I'm heterosexual, I'm not putting a label on myself like I'm hetero.
Okay.
Like it's a personal thing.
Yeah.
Like if somebody is homosexual, somebody maybe in the mosque and maybe lesbian, maybe homosexual. That's like, I don't know unless they tell me.
Okay.
So if somebody tells me that homosexual, lesbian, Okay, that's like, so from an Islamic point of view, a Muslim is the one who submits to the will of God. Every Muslim knows that there are certain sexual activities that are forbidden, prohibited. Now, at the same time, there may be some inclinations that may be natural, that you may be born with finding someone from the same gender more attractive than someone from the opposite gender. You may like boys more as a boy, like girls. But in Islam, we also know that that's going to be your personal struggle then. That's your personal struggle. That yes, you can have friendships, but you cannot engage in specific sexual activity. That is prohibited as a Muslim. And if somebody is engaged as a Muslim, that's between them and God. Like, I don't have the right, I don't have the domain to judge somebody based off that. But I mean, if somebody drinks alcohol, we know it's prohibited. But if somebody does drink alcohol, it's between that person and God. Like, I am not the one that has to or that can treat them differently. So if somebody comes to the mosque and says, I'm gay, like, okay,
Okay.
We're in the mosque to pray, so let's just pray.
Let's just pray, okay.
That's it.
One last thing actually on the mosque. Men and women are segregated, aren't they, in the mosque? Is there
Not
a reason
really,
for
no,
that?
not really, no. Actually,
Okay.
that's another misunderstanding. See,
I'm loving this myth busting that I'm doing here.
so men and women are not really segregated in the mosque. What happens is that in the mosque, usually there is a different prayer area for the women. And the reason for that is our prayer is not just us uttering certain verses or certain words. Our prayer is verbal or also physical. So which means we have certain physical positions, physical actions. So we'll bow down or we will prostrate to the ground. Women, they don't feel comfortable in those positions because you're kind of very vulnerable. You're bowing down, you're prostrating. So you're in a vulnerable position, and women generally, they don't like to be seen by men when they are, praying. They would avoid. I know a situation that a couple of years ago, somebody came in the mosque, a lady, Muslim woman, and she said, "Can I pray?" And there was nobody in the men's prayer hall. Nobody. And I said, "Yes, sister, you can pray here." She said, "No, where is the women's hall?" Okay. I said, "Sister, that's upstairs, but it's cold and there's nobody there. And there's nobody here. It's warm and cozy. You can pray here." No, I want to go to the women's hall. Now, I understood the reason, because someone may come into the mosque while she is praying and she may feel discomfortable. Okay. She may feel uncomfortable. And this is why. So women are not segregated in the mosque. Women pray. During the prayer, they stand behind the men. They stand behind them. So men cannot see them. Because when you're looking in front, you can't see behind. But if men were behind, they could look at women. And women genuinely don't feel,
well, they'll be bending over. And,
exactly, they'll be bending over, their bottom,
I understand it completely,
so they're not comfortable with it. And people may say, well, when you're praying, aren't you supposed to be thinking of God? But absolutely we are. But if
the bottom in your face, it might be different.
Exactly. But if I am praying,
our audience members laughing.
if I am praying, right, and let's suppose I'm hungry, and at the same time I have this, we have a lovely dish called biryani.
Oh my goodness, I know it, of course, yes.
So imagine you have biryani on the table, and I have to pray, and I haven't eaten for, let's say a few hours or a day or so. Like, I will not be able to concentrate much on my prayer. And this is why there is this...
I love this analogy.
This is why this jurisprudence perspective, that there is a school of thought in Islamic jurisprudence which says, when you're hungry and you have to pray, you have to eat first, then pray. Because you're not going to really pray. You're going to find it very difficult to communicate with God and your spirituality, to reflect and to contemplate, because of your biological need. So this is why, look, if there are some men, absolutely, they have a very strong willpower. They won't even, think about anything else. They wouldn't even think about anyone else than God, even if, you have someone who is completely clothless. But look, majority of men are not like that. Majority of men will find it very challenging for them to focus on, the prayer. But the struggle of the men is different thing. The most important is the women themselves. It's their choice. Yeah. They feel genuinely that when we are praying in front of men, we are more exposed, and they don't like it.
Okay. And then just one thing, sorry, I keep saying,
Yes.
and one more thing. The covering of the hair, is that because the hair is beautiful and it's you're showing that you are, I don't know, you're covering your head for God, or is it
Well,
what
to
is
be
the
honest,
reason?
imagine you'd have only hair, just hair. Would that be more attractive of the face? Of course, the face of someone is more attractive than just hair on its own.
Yeah.
But the reason for actually the covering of the hair, has more to do with the Muslim identity and, giving out this message of modesty. It has more to do with that than the attract. I think when we talk about the attractive part, of course, the upper body of a woman for most men would be very attractive, and this is why women, they have to cover their upper body as well. So the hijab is basically covering their hair, but also at the same time covering the upper body, so that area, that is not revealing, and that's what the hijab for the women is. And as I said, the hijab is a very personal thing, and if any woman is wearing the hijab, they do it out of their own choice. They should be respected for that choice. And if somebody isn't wearing the hijab, they do it out of their choice. They should be respected for that too. And respect should go out for both people.
And respect for everyone. I think that's what this conversation has been all about.
Absolutely.
It has been amazing speaking to you, and I just think that it's going to shed so much light on the Muslim faith, Islam in general, and then also the Palestinian cause and what we all need to do and how vocal we all need to be to hopefully have a ceasefire, end this misery for so many people. Can I ask you what advice you'd give young people today? Where do you start?
Well, am I supposed to be the old person?
You can
I still consider myself young.
You look very young. I don't know what it must be. It must be the non-alcoholic way, because your skin is amazing.
Could be. Thank you.
So you can speak about it from any angle.
Well, to be honest, to young people, I would say that don't stop learning. Whatever it is, if there's any course, anything that you can do to enhance your education, your skills, and cherish your youth. Cherish your parents the most, because parents are that blessing of God. There is nothing that substitutes them. Like, you could have more children, you could have another wife or a husband. You can't have another father or mother. So my both parents passed away. My mom passed away when I was 16. Dad passed away 2 years ago during COVID. So I would say cherish your parents, your siblings, your family, and learn and make friendships with those that will benefit you, to become a better human being. And believe me, time flies. Like, I've been here 20 years. I'm 40 now. So when I came, I was 20. I was just recently graduated from the seminary studies, and 20 years have really flown. And I'm like, I wish I spent more time with my parents, with my dad. I wish I had done this. So I would say learn more, and also look after your health. Your health. I mean, you take it for granted. Like parents, we take it for granted. We take our health for granted when we're young. But really, once you get to becoming 40 and so on, you realize that you can't do certain things that you were able to do when you were 20. So cherish that, look after your health, look after your mental health as well, and make friendships with those that can benefit you, make you a better human being. These are the kind of advices I would give to young people.
I read something recently, and it said you can have all the problems in the world, but once you have a health problem, it's the only problem that you have.
It's the only problem you have. That's very true.
That's very sound advice. And then, what is the meaning of life?
The meaning of life, from a Muslim perspective, is life is temporary. Life is a test. Life is something that will go very, very fast. Before you know it, it's finished. So you should make sure that you live your life as someone who has brought positivity wherever you are, someone who has helped people in need, someone who's been there to serve humanity. To be a Muslim means to live a life in the submission of God's will, which means to not only think about God, but also, most importantly, God's creation. To serve God's creation is to serve God. There is a beautiful saying in the Quran in the hadith, the prophetic sayings, that is very similar to something in the Bible that God will say on the day of judgment, I was clothless, you didn't give me clothes. I was hungry, you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, you didn't quench my thirst. And the servant will ask God, well, you are the most magnificent. You are the Lord. How were you clothless? How were you hungry and thirsty? And God will say, well, there was one person, human being, that was clothless. They didn't have clothes. They didn't have a house. If you had given them shelter, it would have been as you have given God shelter. There was someone who was hungry. If you had fed them, it would have been as you have fed God himself. So I believe strongly that the meaning of life is to live your life in a way that you become helpful to other human beings, and be a positive light that illuminates the surroundings that you are with, whether it's your family, whether it's your friends, whether it's your neighbors, that they are illuminated with this love and mercy and compassion from you. That's the meaning of life. And as I said, it's from a Muslim perspective, it's just the Prophet Muhammad said, this life is a dream compared to the hereafter. So in the Islamic tradition, this saying is very significant because we live by it. We live by it that everything we do will be held accountable for. And if we live this life in a good way, we will be able to go to paradise. And this life is a dream, which is like seconds compared to the 8 or 9 hours sleep that you have, So yes, so that's the meaning of life. Be a good human being, be a good person, spread positivity. As a Muslim, I would say to believe in God is like the most logical thing to do. I mean, nothing came out of its own existence, even if it's this glass, if it's this mic, if it's the phone in my pocket, somebody manufactured it. Of course, there is intelligent design involved in this beautiful creation in planet Earth and the human being itself. But most important than that is also that you live your life in a good way, in a positive way.
Dr. Umar, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me.